I think I was going back and just looking at a couple sections, and actually what I did is I went and I watched the Mandalore gaming review of it. So one thing that I do is that unless I'm researching something, I won't go if I'm doing like a specific game. I won't really look up any other things about it that I haven't already seen. Like reviews or something like that. Just because I don't want to like, I don't know, I don't want to like cross. I feel like it gets me too into my own head about like, oh, I need to say something that's different or something like that instead of just giving, letting it kind of naturally. It kind of like what's like taints the pool. I don't know what you'd call that. I want to be like the control group. Like I don't know, I barely know anything about this game. I want to go in knowing as little as possible, because that's what a lot of other people are going to go in knowing. Whereas like, so the Mandalore review is interesting, and I think it's a good video. For one, it's much shorter, and he doesn't really cover the whole game, but his his video is coming from the perspective of someone who's played it like, who's at least tried to play it at that point. He tried to play it like 3 times or something like that, and that review was the first time he actually managed to get through. So he already like knew stuff about the game. So like for instance, one thing that kind of flew over my head is I kind of used like 2 weapons the whole game, pretty much. I used the basic starter, like SMG, and the sniper, because those were the most effective things for the way that I felt like playing the game. And I didn't really experiment with the other weapons. One, just because, like, I don't know. I'm the type of person who I play a game and I find the thing that works for me, and then I just kind of stick to that, and I don't really do anything else unless the game forces me to. Like it heavily incentivizes me experimenting with something else. So there was actually one point where I did switch over to what the main weapon I was using was. Huh? That doesn't make any sense. I switched over the main weapon I was using, and I was using like a machine gun or something as opposed to an SMG. And it had the SMG holds like 100. The clip size is like 100, and the machine gun was like 30, and I was just constantly running out of ammo. And I was like, yeah, I'm going back to the SMG. And then I never looked back. Besides like that last section where I switched over to the minigun, which they just let you have from the beginning, which I didn't even think about how funny that is. They just let you have something like that at the very start. And to be fair, the way the game is designed, that isn't like, I don't think that's super broken. But yeah. Because even, there was stuff I had to like I chose to not include in the script just because like, there's so much. Like there's way too much in that game to go over in like a single video and keep it. I mean, the video's over an hour long, and there was stuff that I didn't even talk about. Like there's, for instance, one little aspect of it is that there is a class system in the game. Not like a defined set class like that you select. Like obviously there's a character creator where you're rolling for stats, but basically there's like a little terminal in the library that tells you, well, if you spec into these stats, that's considered this kind of a build, and depending on what level you are, there's like 3 different ranks for each build essentially. So there's something like, I don't, like a dozen or more than a dozen different classes based on what build you go with. If you spec into like a specific stat or 2 different stats, I think it there might be like 1 or 2 where you go into 3 different stats mainly, but yeah. And every time you finish a mission, it tells you what class, so to speak, you're playing, or you've kind of built into. The problem with that is that if you're playing solo, then you're basically railroaded into the all-rounder class, which they call equilibrium. Okay, we're good. God damn. Okay, the cord. I gotta get like a different USB cord for my mic. It's always slipping out. It's pissing me off. Right. So the all-rounder class is Equilibrium Fist. You're basically stuck playing that one because in order to just get through the game solo, you kind of have to like put points, like spread your points out, like very generally, like accuracy for your shooting, a couple strength for when you have to use melee, hacking for parts where you gotta hack, medicine especially. So like medicine, like you have to be healing a lot because you're just going to be taking a lot of shots from enemies randomly spawning. You're going to have to using the med kit a lot. Medicine, the higher your medicine stat, the faster it regenerates, because the weird way the med kit works, you might have noticed this from the footage. I didn't really point it out, but you could have noticed it. The weird way the med kit works is that, well, for one, it's a syringe. It's not like a kit, but it recharges up to like a certain amount of health, and then you can use it, and then it goes down to 0, and then you have to wait for it to recharge again. Also, apparently you can overdose on it, which never happened to me, but immersive sim, you know? Like, okay, I don't know what that does for the game, but alright. The game is it's so strange because someone pointed out in a comment that the game, one of the biggest problems with the game is, and I thought this was so great, is its failure to communicate its own design. And I think that rings true for a lot of it, because the E.Y.E is it can be a really fun game. Like when people say that this is like their favorite game of all time, or this game's some kind of the people who love this game, I totally believe that. I totally think that they have perfectly like valid reasons for having that reaction to the game. I did not. At the end of the day, I don't think it's excuse me, I don't think it's bad in the same way I'd call something like, I don't know, Zen, the Intergalactic Ninja, bad. I just think that it's, for such an open game, you have to enjoy it in a very specific way, if that makes sense. I went in expecting some kind of immersive sim RPG like shooter, and what I got was a lot more than I bargained for, and which was not immediately obvious. Like, the fact that the story is so unimportant really flies over your head when you're constantly like being fed story stuff in the first few hours, right? And the fact that the story is intentionally vague and like very obtuse sets up like this mystery, right? So you're constantly, what's so silly, I won't say stupid, but what's so silly and kind of frustrating is that going through the first time, I'm like, there has to be something more, right? Like, there has to be something, some kind of twist or something like that going on here, because it's so intentionally vague and weird, but I also couldn't tell how much of the weirdness of the game was just from the developers being amateurs. And it turns out that the majority of the story isn't important. Most of the stuff that's going on is not important, which I brought up in the video, but it makes it confusing because it's like setting up this almost like breadcrumb trail that ultimately feels meaningless. Besides like the whole reincarnation gimmick, the vast majority of the game is not plot relevant. And it's also why like I was working, I'm like, fuck, this is so long. This script was like 10,000 words. I'm like, this is so long. And I'm thinking, like, is there a way that I could split this up? And then I realized, like, the way the game is structured, I can't. Number one is I would like it to be one video just because, for artistic reasons, because I'd like to, like, I need to, like, make the video in a way that sells how mind-boggling the game is, and I think you just need the sheer runtime to get that like, I want you to feel by the end of the video like you've gone on a journey, like you've been taken for a ride, Marvel 2 style. And splitting that up with, like, okay, if I put like a week in between uploads, you don't get that feeling from it. Like, I need to convey how epic this game is in scope. And then two, the way the game is structured, there's no, like, halfway mark. Like, when I was doing the Mega Man comic, it's 16 issues, right? And the 8th issue ends on a cliffhanger, pretty much. So I'm like, okay, this is shaping up to be really long. So why don't I, like, just cut it in half? And I have, like, a decent, I'll just do 8 in one video and 8 in the next. And I'll wrap it up. And, like, I thought that worked out pretty well. Because it's also, like, not something where, like, yeah, it's crazy and it just goes and goes and goes. But I don't... part of what I want to convey... I didn't, like, necessarily have to convey... Feel the need to convey... that it was, I don't know, that same sense of scope. It's just like, here's 30 minutes of craziness, here's another 30 minutes of craziness picking up from last time. That was like felt like a clean break to me. That was also something I struggled with like the Die Hard series, where I was like, okay, what are the natural stopping points? Because I need to split this up. What are the natural stopping points, and kind of what stories do I dedicate each video to, basically, while kind of keeping in a chronological order. I sort of bounced around in Die Hard, but that's because there was so much stuff going on. There were so many, like, weird plot lines happening at different points. Like, I could probably make a timeline of what happened. And also just a bunch of stuff that there were no clear, like, dates. So just like, yeah, just pull this story out of the ether. But anyway, yeah, so it was just a stressful video. I'm glad people enjoyed it, but was there anything else I wanted to talk about with E.Y.E? Like, oh yeah, so, you know, someone left that comment, and what their take was that it seemed like the best way to play it was multiplayer, right? Because people in your little squad of, like, maybe 4 people, or up to 32, God forbid, people in, like, your little squad can actually play. They can actually, like, you know, go into different builds. You can have different play styles. You can have one guy who specs into, like, certain kinds of, like, one guy just takes heavy weapons and all he does is take accuracy and, like, endurance. And he's just like he literally just plays like heavy from TF2. One guy takes just a bunch of, like, speed, and he just does, like, light armor and melee weapons, and specs into, like, all the like speed and speed boost stuff. Upgrades his legs, his cyber legs, and just runs around and cuts people down. One guy specs into medicine and just goes around healing other people. One thing that I didn't mention, the medkit's primary fire, like the left click, is to heal another player. The right click is to heal yourself. That really tripped me up the first time I had to use it, because it was, like, in the middle of an intense... I was, like, I was being shot. I was like, oh, I need it. And then I left click, and I stab forward in the air with it, and I'm like, oh, and then I right click, and I'm like, okay, then you heal yourself with it. Like, it's made, the primary fire is for another player. It's to heal an ally. So, which is weird because, like, again, the game's story is so common, like, it's so present. It isn't like, I'm trying to think of another sandbox game that you just kind of, like, I don't know, something like a roguelike, or Symphony of the Night. I'll take this as just a random example. Symphony of the Night. Yeah, it does have like a plot and stuff, of course, but there's like 3, 4, maybe 5 plot points that happen in that game. Like where you're actually okay, something happens in the plot. Most of the game is just you playing it, right? It's just the story of the gameplay, so to speak. And that game really, what I came to understand when I was done with it is Symphony of the Night is really like a big sandbox. Is one of the things that's neat about it. That game's a big sandbox, and the story is not super present. So like they made that multiplayer Castlevania game, right? That no one remembers. It was like Harmony of Dissonance or something like that. And I haven't played it. I've heard like mixed things about it, but conceptually it makes a lot of sense. Like, oh yeah, I mean, if you just up like okay, you just increase the ways that one character can like differentiate themselves and kind of build out into different sorts of play styles, and then you have people like work together. That could work in like that kind of a genre. In E.Y.E, it's weird, and it almost feels like it doesn't fit because no one is playing. Or what am I talking about? The story is just kind of like, okay, well, to get to the next story mission, you gotta like talk to Ramona, and you gotta like have these conversations with characters and stuff like that. In order to accept side quests, you gotta talk to characters. There's like always some kind of story thing happening. Also, in multiplayer, only one person can view dialogue. Only one person can get like a cutscene, sort of, or dialogue sequence. That's it. No one else can do it. So like it's clearly not compatible. Like it's built to be a separate thing. But also you have like a single character. Like when you create your character, that's like it's like making a character in an MMO or something. Like you're making a character and then you can play them in single player or multiplayer. It's basically the same thing. Essentially, it's so weird. The game is essentially like a Half-Life 2 multiplayer mod where the maps are like multiplayer maps, except you're just playing them just by yourself, and there's NPCs there that use like code from, like that's modded to be like an RPG. And the enemy AI is basically multiplayer bots. They're basically like multiplayer bots, so sometimes they just mess up, and that's why their behaviors are so like unstructured, or if that makes sense. Like they're so generic. They're just like, I don't even think of like what the enemy types are. There's people who shoot at you, which is like all the gangsters, all the feds, the cynicals. The gangsters and the feds also like just throw grenades sometimes. There's a couple of the Strombolis, like there's the one Stromboli type that throws fireballs. There's ones that leap and do a melee. There's the werewolves who just run up and do a melee. There's the hammer guys who just run up and do a melee. Like really just basic behaviors. So just like shooting plus grenade, throwing a fireball, melee, with the potential of like, oh, you can do a little leap, like the little Tyranid guys. And then I guess the E.Y.E members you fight at the end, who all just are literally just player characters. They're actually literally just player characters. Just like, cause all the armor, all the armor is just reused. There's like 6 different models or something for the light, medium, heavy, and then Coulter and John uniforms, and they just throw them with a random weapon set up, and they just have them to fight you. They just throw waves of them at you. Like the enemy types are very basic because they're literally just programmed to work like basically multiplayer bots, and sometimes they just bug out, and the game will just randomly spawn them out of sight most of the time. Again, I swear to God, there was one point where I was playing and I totally saw an enemy pop into existence in front of me, and I couldn't find it in my footage. I should have taken a note of it or something, but yeah. It's an interesting game. Like, if you're going into the game and you, like, know how to play it in a way that it kind of wants to be played, you can have a ton of fun with it. I'm sure. And like again, I thought I was pretty honest with like the way that I played it is not how you are supposed to play it. And I couldn't have known, which I think is a problem. Because it's not like, oh, okay, this is how it's supposed to be. It's so like for instance, I played Moonbase Alpha for the first time a few weeks ago, just because I thought it looked neat. I just seen it. I didn't quite know what it was, but I found out, oh, it's like a NASA training video game. So I boot up the game, and it's free, pretty sure. I boot up the game, and there isn't like a single player thing. It's just like you create a lobby, and there's a various game types, and the smallest like lobby you can make is 1 to 2 players. So I'm playing the game, and I figure out basically what you need to do over the course of like 30 minutes, and like 1 or 2 failed playthroughs, and eventually I realize, oh, it's just not made for one person to do, which makes sense because it said 1 to 2 players. And I think it says something about it's recommended that you don't play it solo. I think you can finish the game solo. It's only like 20 minutes, but it's not made for that. It's made for 2 people. Like the timing is super tight, super duper tight if you're going to be doing it solo. I does not even have anything like that. It just like you start it up and everything feels like a single player game, but it's like almost not even designed for that. It's so weird. It's so strange. Yeah, interesting game. I almost have the inkling to go back and play it just to like try and explore it more, but just the janky, weird, fucked up parts of the game, like the enemy spawning is one of the biggest hurdles for me, just because it's just random. It's random, and it just like it's too chaotic and messy, and it just feels like I'm just responding to random threats that are popping up, and I don't know. The combat was not that interesting to me. It was perfectly serviceable, but just I don't know. I feel like randomness a lot of times, like something like random enemy spawns or random generation, is more often just like a way for developers to get away with not like handcrafting something, which I get that that's hard, but I think I don't know, I prefer it. I think that the returns are not as great. I'm not a huge fan of like just randomly generating everything. Yeah, again, because I had so many thoughts on this game, and a lot of them couldn't make it into the video. So if I come up with anything else that I was thinking about, then, oh yeah, and I totally forgot to mention that the game was actually based off of, well, I did remember to mention this. Okay, so the game is based on a sci-fi tabletop RPG called Ava. Ava was created by the developers. It was created by Strumon Studios. They have never released it. So this game's whole excuse me. Oh god. So this game's whole convoluted, messy lore is based off of a game that basically doesn't exist. Essentially, effectively, does not exist. And also you're seeing it through the eyes of, like, an insane person. It's so, like, there's so many layers to it. I went back and I forgot to mention it in the script, so I went back, I re-recorded it, and then guess what? I looked back at the recording, and my frickin' USB little thing, whatever, the little... My mic came unplugged during it, so there's just no audio for the little retake thing I did. So I was like, oh, fuck. I guess I'll just have to redo it, and then I forgot which part that was, because I just had to get into the meat of editing it. I couldn't remember which part exactly I'd re-recorded, because there were so many things. There were so many little details in that video that I had to like go back and write stuff in about. Anyway,